A cold October rain had been drizzling since morning, turning Willow Street into a muddy mess. Every car that drove past kicked up a fountain of dark slush, but the filthiest place on the entire street was behind the dumpsters in the back alley of an old deli. There, in the narrow gap between a rusty container and the rough brick wall, she lived. She didn't move. She just lay curled into a tight, dirty ball, trying to make her body as small as possible. Outwardly, she resembled a discarded rag that had been hastily swept onto a pile of trash. Once, her fur had been dazzling white, clean as the first snow, but now it had taken on the color of wet asphalt, mixed with grease and dust. Several months of street life had transformed the beauty into an unremarkable creature permeated by the street's stench. Inside this gray, dull mass, a small, terrified heartbeat. A sharp, piercing sound, the squeal of brakes, made her flinch. It was the only instantaneous muscle twitch, immediately suppressed by tension. She didn't flatten her ears, because they were already pressed tight against her head. She didn't try to flee because she had no strength left. The only parts of her immobilized body that worked were her enormous amber eyes. They darted like two burning candles in the dark gap, catching any movement. It was 8:00 p.m. The streetlights on Willow had been lit for a long time, casting only a narrow strip of dim yellow light into the gap. Unfortunately, this light offered no warmth. A burning ache consumed her lower belly from hunger. She licked her dry, rough tongue, and instead of the taste of food, she got the bitter, earthy flavor of the grime covering her. The smells that had always guided her in this terrible new world layered one upon the other today in a heavy, oppressive shroud. The sour odor of decaying leaves, seeping in from everywhere, was cut by the sharp, suffocating ammonia stench from the dumpster, and through it all, a faint but tempting aroma of fried onions and cheap burgers wafted from a nearby food truck. "Just don't move. Just wait it out. They will leave." Heavy, coarse male boots sounded nearby. A man in work overalls, with a dull canvas bag slung over his shoulder, stopped a few feet from her to light a cigarette. The cat felt the weight of his gaze, although he wasn't looking at her, but into the darkness. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She felt the muscles in her back and neck tense, ready to bolt at any moment. The prolonged strain made her jaws ache, and her tucked-in paws began to go numb. The man struck a lighter. The bright flame briefly illuminated his unshaven face. He inhaled deeply, and the pungent smell of tobacco overpowered all other odors, settling in her nose like acrid chemical dust. "Hey!" he yelled loudly into the distance. "You gonna be much longer?" A high-pitched, screeching laugh answered him. The man spat on the wet asphalt, and his heavy boots shuffled across the puddles again. The cat swallowed. Every movement of this human was a potential threat to her. She expected him to take another step and kick the container or throw something, but he just walked away. The sound of his footsteps slowly faded, and all that remained was the quiet song of the autumn rain. The tension that had held her in a vice slowly released. Her paws, which barely touched the ground, began to ache. Suddenly, a small, quick silhouette appeared only a couple of yards away. It was a young black and white cat. He was smaller than her, but looked healthier and bolder. The cat approached a flipped-over cardboard tray someone had left by the wall, and quickly, almost furtively, pulled a small piece of sausage from underneath it. He saw her. A small black pinpoint seemed to flicker in his eyes. He could have simply walked away, but he didn't. He arched his back, hissed menacingly, and abruptly thrust his front paw, holding the prize, forward. It wasn't just a warning, it was a statement. "This is my street. This is my food." something broke inside the cat. The hunger she had been suppressing flared into a furious, humiliating desire. But she couldn't. She was too frightened, too weak to engage in a fight. She couldn't even show anger. Her large, once proud head dropped slightly lower. Her amber eyes looked away, toward the wet, muddy gap. She did what she always did. She gave up. The black and white tomcat stood for a moment, let out a satisfied grunt, raised his tail like a flagpole, and disappeared into the darkness, carrying away the only hope of food for the day. And she was left alone again in the cold, alien grime. Once she had eaten from a porcelain bowl on a warm Persian rug. Once her name sounded as clean as her fur. Now only painful, distant phantoms of that life remained, making the present humiliation even sharper. The only thing that could offer any solace was the promise of the next dawn, cold as it might be, but at least with a hint of light. She painfully stretched out her back leg, feeling a sharp twinge in the stiff joint, and tried to lick her dirty, cold flank. The smell of soot and dampness instantly pulled her back to reality. "And you said you didn't like her. What are we going to do with this marvel now?" A sharp, slightly hysterical voice tore Snowy from a warm, weightless sleep. She was sitting on the kitchen windowsill, where the midday sun was especially warm and stretching blissfully. It was her ritual. A golden beam of light, piercing the sheer curtain, outlined every curve of her snow-white, almost glowing fur. She opened one green eye and immediately recognized the tone. It was Natalie. Snowy had always disliked her, although Natalie, her owner's daughter, had never actually done anything bad to her. It was just that Natalie always smelled of sharp impatience, cigarettes, and indifference. Her owner, an elderly woman whose name Snowy knew like music, Eleanor Hayes, stood by the table. Her full, slightly tired lips were pressed into a thin line. She set aside a cup of unfinished chamomile tea. "Natalie, don't yell and don't call her that word," Eleanor said softly, but her voice held a firmness that always made Snowy feel safe. "She's a Persian. Her name is Snowy. And what are we going to do?" "Nothing. She lives here." "Mom, are you hearing me? Are you on your medication?" Natalie, a woman in her mid-40s in a worn leather jacket, ran a hand through her short, stiff hair. "We're talking about the inheritance, about how she nodded toward Snowy, "isn't on the list." Snowy raised her head. The word inheritance meant nothing to her, but she sensed the change in the atmosphere. The sunlight suddenly didn't seem so warm. Her gaze, usually lazy and velvety, fixed on Eleanor, seeking reassurance. "Everything's fine." Eleanor walked over to the windowsill, and the room instantly filled with the warm, familiar scent of her old knitted cardigan, permeated with lavender and something indefinably homey. She rested her hand on the cat's soft back. "And she will live here as long as I'm alive," Eleanor almost whispered, but her words sounded like a final decree. "You're not immortal, Mom," Natalie gasped in indignation. If something happens, am I supposed to drag her to my 2-bedroom apartment where I'm allergic?" "Then just find her a good home, dear," her owner said, stroking Snowy's head. The cat arched her back, offering the delicate spot behind her ear to the woman's fingers. "You'll find good people. She's a purebred. Someone will take her." Snowy didn't understand the words, but she understood the music of the phrases. Threat. Instability. She felt the muscles on Eleanor's back tighten under her hand. Her owner had always been her anchor, a quiet, stable harbor. But now, the anchor itself seemed unreliable. This memory was vivid, like a burn. It was the last thing she remembered of that past life where there was no need to be afraid. The reality she lived in now was completely different. She lay in a narrow, cold gap. The scent of lavender had been replaced by ammonia, the Persian rug by soggy cardboard. Eleanor had left quietly. Snowy hadn't seen it. The day the paramedics came and carried her owner out on a stretcher, Snowy had hidden under the sofa. She waited for 2 days. The lavender scent faded, and other smells came into the house: men's cologne, cheap polish, and something alcoholic. On the 3rd day, Natalie and a man, he was too tall for Natalie, in a huge, puffy winter coat, collected the last of the belongings. The cabinets were empty. Crumpled newspapers now lay on the windowsill where Snowy used to sunbathe. The man was not tall, but bulky. His hands were quick. They moved fast and roughly. He wrapped her in a towel, and Snowy immediately felt a tight grip around her neck. "Just toss her, Nat," he said in a husky voice. "Purebred, you say? She's mangy and barely breathing. The streets are full of them." "Mom asked," Natalie said irritably. "I don't want a guilt trip. Find a home for her means find a home for her." Snowy hung in the air. Her hind paws kicked desperately, trying to find purchase. She remembered that height just above a man's head. She remembered the smell of his puffy coat, rancid motor oil and cheap tobacco. From then on, everything was not sudden, but agonizingly slow. They went down in the elevator. A blast of cold wind hit her face. The city noise, the roar of tires, a distant bark, was deafening after the silence of the old apartment. The climax happened quickly. The man unclasped his fingers. He simply dropped her. He didn't throw or kick her. He bent over a planter by the first-floor entrance of building number 26 on Seaside Avenue and released her from the towel. Snowy landed on the wet, damp-smelling earth. She immediately ran, without looking back, without making a sound. She felt her back paw slide on the wet grass. She ran until her breath cut off in her throat. The sharp physical pain of running in total terror was less painful than the realization that there was nothing left behind her. She turned into the first dark alleyway. Her head was spinning, and her dry tongue couldn't moisten her throat. She sat down, leaning her back against the cold, rough curb. A desperate, almost silent meow, more like a sob, escaped her chest. It was her farewell cry for Eleanor and all her past. When dawn broke, her white fur had already collected the first street dust, and the scent of lavender had completely evaporated. She felt hunger and instinctively moved toward the strong smell of trash. She was no longer Snowy. She was simply a cat searching for a way to survive. Movement is warmth. Stopping is death. This simple animal mantra became her only philosophy. She remembered how in the past, when evening came, all she had to do was jump onto Eleanor's lap, and warmth would immediately envelop her. Now, warmth had to be earned. Every morning, every hour. It was the end of November. The frost penetrated everywhere. It didn't just cool the air. It bit into her fur, seeped under her skin, and made her insides shrink into a cold, aching ball. She spent the first week in a panic. A house cat who had never used her claws for anything but playing with plush mice now had to defend every crumb of food. Once, she found an almost whole fish head near a drainpipe. She didn't get to eat it. A large orange tomcat, whose smell of stale tobacco and dampness stuck in her nose, drove her away with a single swipe. She had no strength to resist. She only felt a sharp claw lightly scratch her shoulder. With each passing day, she became grayer. Grime accumulated on the snow-white base that had once been her pride. This dirt wasn't washed away by the rain. It mixed with skin oil, road dust, and soot from under cars, creating a dense gray crust. Her fur lost its volume, becoming heavy and coarse. She hardly groomed herself. Prolonged licking required too much energy, which had to be conserved for survival. Night was the most terrifying time. She found refuge in a small abandoned basement near the market, where she could only squeeze through a narrow bent grate. The smells inside were unbearable. Mildew, rotting wood, and staleness, but it was dry. She lay pressed as tightly as possible against an old, rusted tank. The cold came not just from below, it streamed from the metal walls. A heavy dullness weighed on her paws, which felt like chunks of ice. Hunger was no longer a sharp pain, but a dull, aching emptiness. She watched other cats and dogs catch mice, but she had no memory of that skill. A cozy apartment, a bowl of wet food, the peaceful sounds of the television, that was her basic programming. A mouse seemed like just a part of the interior, not prey. "You have to," a quiet, desperate voice sounded inside her. "You have to learn." One day, when it was especially quiet outside, and wet snow clogged the basement grate, she made a decision. Her whiskers vibrated with tension. Something was moving in the corner behind a pile of rotten rags. Snowy, or no longer snowy, but just a gray shadow, prepared herself. She stood on 4 paws. The tension in her body was so great that her abdominal muscles clenched. Her instincts, those of a decorative cat, not a hunter, were comical. She didn't crouch down, as a predator should. She simply froze. A small rodent, gray and quick, darted out from behind the trash. It was brazen, almost unafraid of her. It clearly knew this creature was no threat. The cat lunged. It wasn't a jump, but a clumsy, abrupt push. She missed. The mouse vanished into the crack between the stones. Disappointment filled her mouth with a rough taste. The failure brought with it not just hunger, but humiliation. It was proof of her inadequacy. She was purebred, she was beautiful, but she didn't know how to survive. The outside world didn't see her breed. It saw only dirt, fear, and weakness. At one point, as she sat near the basement, trying to lick her dirty, numb paw, a young woman in a bright puffer coat walked past. She was carrying a bag of groceries. The cat didn't move. She just watched. The woman stopped. The cat felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the human would see in those amber eyes that she wasn't astray, that she was hurting. The woman looked at the lump of dirt, tilted her head to the side. She didn't even attempt to approach. Her lips twisted into a grimace of disgust. "Oh, how filthy!" she said loudly, and then walked right on. The words reached the cat, not the meaning, but the intonation. Disgust. A harsh truth that hurt more than any hunger. The cat slowly turned. There was no fur on her back. There was only a dirty, warm crust. It became clear to her, to survive, she needed to become one with the dirt, to become invisible. She crawled out of her refuge. The snow that had fallen overnight was fresh and white. She walked slowly across it. After 3 steps, a crust of dirt had already accumulated on her paws. Against the perfectly white backdrop of the snow, her gray silhouette was almost invisible. This was her new camouflage coat. She lifted her head. In the distance, at the edge of the alley, she saw the light of a street lamp and heard a faint, plaintive squeak. Someone was fighting for their life. It was one of her brothers in misfortune. The cat did not go there. Fighting for food meant open conflict. Instead, she turned toward the part of the market that always smelled of fish and rotting vegetables. There, among the cardboard boxes in the shadows, she would have a chance. A chance to remain unseen, to survive this longest, coldest first winter. A sharp, acrid smell of gasoline, mixed with the odor of cheap hot coffee, overpowered everything. This was the scent of the main, busiest street in the city, Central Avenue. The cat, who could now barely be called Snowy, lay under a bench at a bus stop. Midday. The most dangerous time for a street animal because human attention was at its peak. She pressed herself against the cold concrete. Her dirty, dark fur made her virtually invisible against the backdrop of dusty asphalt and old flyers. She had become part of the trash. The world around her moved at a furious pace. People hurried, footsteps, footsteps, footsteps. All those feet in leather shoes, high boots and sneakers rushed past. No one slowed down. No one dropped their gaze below knee level. Today, she was especially hungry, but the hunger was no longer just a feeling, but an almost physical heaviness she carried within her. The heaviness of her chin resting on her stiff paws, the tension in her shoulders from anticipating that someone might finally notice. She watched. It was her only entertainment, her only job, to study people. There went a woman in her 30s, completely absorbed in her headphones. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail. The woman was speaking loudly and abruptly on the phone. "No, I haven't seen it. Are you sure you left it on the shelf? I don't have time. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Her eyes scanned the bus stop. She wasn't looking for a living creature, but for something that might confirm her words or help find a lost item. Her gaze passed within an inch of the cat. The cat felt no warmth, no pity, not even disgust. Nothing. She was transparent, an invisible being. In another time, when she lived in the warm apartment, her snow-white coat had inevitably attracted attention. Her owner often recounted how the neighbors envied her. "Ah, Snowy, you're such a beauty." Now that beauty was buried beneath a gray, rough shell. Suddenly, 2 young women stopped near her. They were laughing loudly, discussing a photograph on a phone. The cat could catch the faint, sweet scent of their cheap perfume. One of them, in a bright purple jacket, placed a paper coffee cup on the ground next to her. "Be careful," the second one said. "Oh, whatever." The first one waved it off. "It's almost empty." Their dialogue was quick, like a flash. "Oh, God." The girl in purple suddenly fell silent and looked down. The cat tensed. This is it. Now she would scream or call out or try to touch her. Her throat constricted. The girl lifted her foot. The cat saw her sneaker stop literally right above her head. "I think I stepped on some trash." She abruptly shifted her foot without even looking at what was beneath it. The cat felt a slight, almost weightless nudge on her back. The girl didn't realize what it was, as if a plastic bag had simply crinkled under her shoe. "Come on, our bus is here," the second one said, and they walked away, still laughing. The cat was left lying there, stunned. She hadn't been kicked, she hadn't been chased away. She had been mistaken for garbage. This was the deepest humiliation because it didn't even require effort, just everyday, casual indifference. She slowly, with effort, turned her head. The coffee cup remained on the bench. There were probably a few drops left at the bottom. In her past life, she would never have touched such food. She was given only clean water in a clean bowl, but now she had no choice. She moved. She crawled out of her hiding spot, completely ignoring the footsteps of passers-by. She didn't care. She was already outside the zone of their attention. Reaching the cup, she pressed her nose into it. There was a tiny bit of moisture inside. It was a thick, bitter, cooled mixture of coffee, sugar, and cream. She quickly, greedily swallowed those few drops, feeling the sweetness and warmth briefly burn her throat. It was nothing, but it was something. She backed away. The bones of her ears were cold. Suddenly, a loud, distinct sound rang out in the sky, the chirp of a chickadee. The sound was clean and sharp. The cat raised her head, truly looking at the world around her for the first time in a long time. A chickadee sat on a thin branch of an old maple tree. The bird was bright yellow, full of life and motion. At that moment, amidst the smells of gasoline and human indifference, something ancient and wild awakened in the cat. Something that Eleanor had never seen, because the cat had never been given a reason to show it. The hunter's instinct, buried beneath layers of fat, care, and purebred status, suddenly lifted its head. She felt her body, despite its weakness, gather itself. She focused her amber eyes on the chickadee, not for food. No, she was too weak to catch it. But as a proof. She was still a predator. She was still alive. The chickadee fluttered away and disappeared. But that short, sharp feeling, that momentary sense of purpose, became a connecting link for her. If she could still hunt, then she could still survive. Tomorrow she would return to the market. There, in the shadow of the boxes, in that realm of decay and hope, she would continue to learn to be invisible. A long time ago, in a world of Persian rugs and porcelain bowls, her body was allowed to be soft. Snowy's fur was like a cloud, and her body a relaxed, carefree mass. She didn't have to be strong. Now she was all tension, from the tips of her dirty whiskers to her stained paws. Every muscle was ready to jump or flee. Her body had become a survival tool, but deep inside a pain pulsed. A pain unrelated to hunger or cold. It was the pain of inadequacy. Gray March was drawing to a close. The spring sun fell upon the abandoned yard enclosed by a brick wall, where she was trying to find food scraps in overturned crates, but it didn't yet offer warmth. The air carried the strong, clean scent of damp earth and grass, forcing its way through the asphalt. This scent awakened instincts in other animals that had been suppressed in her. She had come here to wait out the dawn quietly in the shadows, but she found she was not alone. A large tabby cat was sitting on an old rusty windowsill, purring loudly. Next to her, huddled together, clung 3 tiny blind kittens. The sight of this family struck her more sharply than any hunger. Snowy froze, her chest tight with tension. When she lived at home, Eleanor always remembered the day she was taken to the vet. It was scary then, painful, and then empty. She was spayed. Her body could not give life. The tabby mother looked at her with lazy but confident aggression. It was a look of ownership. "My territory, my children, your place is on the side." Snowy slowly looked away. She felt like an outcast, not just because of the dirt and fear, but because of this internal biological flaw. She was beautiful, but non-functional. She couldn't participate in this eternal fundamental cycle. At that moment, he appeared, that large orange tomcat who had once driven her away from the fish head. He smelled sharply of strength, and another suffocating sweetness that seemed to mask the smell of dampness. He walked leisurely toward the tabby mother. Despite her defensive posture, she did not hiss. She just pressed her kittens closer to her. "Look who's here," the orange tomcat said, his voice low and guttural. "The invisible one." Snowy pressed against the wall. She didn't move, but the fur on her scruff stood on end. The orange cat, without taking his eyes off the tabby, suddenly moved slowly toward Snowy. "Get lost," he ordered curtly. She knew if he raised his paw, she wouldn't be able to fight back. She had no strength, and more importantly, no reason to fight. She had nothing to defend but her insignificant, lonely life. "You're not from here. You don't belong," he added. "You've even lost your nose for mice." Snowy felt the pads of her back paws begin to go numb. She didn't want to show weakness, but she couldn't fight. The tabby mother, watching the scene, suddenly hissed, but the hiss was directed not at Snowy, but at the orange tomcat. "Leave her. She's empty. No rival." The word empty pierced her sharper than a claw. Yes, she was empty. She couldn't have kittens. She deserved neither territory nor respect. The orange cat smirked. "Well, if she's empty, she has no business being here. Scram." He didn't touch her. He just stood there. His posture was a threat, powerful and unequivocal. Snowy slowly, deliberately, slowly retreated. She didn't run away, so as not to appear cowardly, but she didn't linger, so as not to provoke him. She backed up to the gate, feeling her body warm from the internal fever of humiliation. She left the yard and headed toward the familiar market area. She walked, and her body, despite its weakness, moved with a newfound, purposeful determination. She needed to find a place where there would be no family scenes, no kittens, no orange tomcat who knew her secret. A few blocks later, she reached a quiet green space near a playground. The playground was empty. Snowy tucked herself under a bush where the remnants of dirty winter leaves still lay. She curled into a ball. She was no longer fighting hunger or cold. She was fighting the memory of what she had been and the realization of what she had become. Gray, empty, unwanted. At that moment, a woman walked past on the path. She walked slowly, carrying a small, cheap plastic bag. The cat froze out of habit. The woman was not young, with short graying hair. She walked slightly hunched and looked very tired. The woman stopped by a bench, sat down, and pulled out a piece of white bread from the bag that looked stale and old. She broke off a small piece, and she didn't eat it. She simply placed it on the edge of the bench nearby and began watching the birds. It wasn't charity, it was more like an absent-minded action. Snowy looked at the bread. Bread is not meat. It's not food for a cat, but it was carbohydrates, energy. She realized that this woman, absorbed in her own problems, might be her salvation. She didn't see her as purebred, dirty, or empty. She simply didn't see her as anything at all. The indifference that had been killing her could now protect her. Perhaps this was her new role, not garbage, but an invisible shadow seeking a way to survive. 7 months had passed since that October day when Snowy, or what was left of her, ended up on the street. 7 months of hunger, cold, and a fight for every drop of water and every bit of warmth. June had arrived. Willow Street, where her odyssey had begun, was steeped in the thick, sticky scent of cottonwood fluff and hot asphalt. This warmth, which she had so desperately sought in winter, was now almost unbearable, but it also brought a small blessing. People had stopped wearing heavy coats, and their steps were lighter, their attention more scattered. Snowy had settled in the yard of an old apartment building that backed onto Hope Lane, the same quiet green area she had retreated to after the clash with the orange tomcat. There, under the dense lilac bush, she felt most protected. Her gray, matted fur, which had been perfect camouflage on the dirty asphalt, now looked alien against the bright greenery. She was surviving, not living. She remembered the tired woman with the graying hair who left stale bread on the bench. The cat had learned to come to that bench at the same time, when the sun was high. But today, the woman didn't come. Snowy froze by the bush. Her body was taut as a tripwire. Instead of the lonely woman, others arrived. First, she heard clear, uneven voices, children's voices. They were so pure and sharp that they pierced the dense cocoon of fear she had wrapped herself in. "Grandma, look! I have a plane! It flies higher than yours!" a boy shouted. "You're not following the rules again. Now bring it here, or I'll get mad," a higher girl's voice chimed in. A woman approached the bench. She was older than the one with the bread, but carried herself with more confidence. In her posture, despite her age, she was in her 60s, there was a sense of strength and a certain inner gentleness. This was Annabelle Foster. She sat on the bench, took wet wipes from her bag, and meticulously began to clean her hands. Her 2 grandchildren stopped beside her, a girl about 9 in a pink dress and a boy about 7 with a bucket and shovel. Snowy flinched. Children were unpredictable, loud, and liked to grab. She was already preparing to crawl deeper into the bush to become completely invisible. But then the girl, tired of playing with the plane, moved aside to adjust the elastic band on her sandal. Her gaze, completely unfocused, swept the grass and landed on the gray lump. The girl froze. Her name was Lucy. "Oh, Grandma, did you see?" Annabelle, wiping her glasses, frowned discontentedly. "What is it, Lucy Bug? Did you find ants again?" "No, there's a cat," Lucy whispered. Her tone had changed. It lacked the screaming or disgust that Snowy had heard from people before. There was surprise and a hint of pity. The boy, named Pete, immediately dropped his bucket and ran up to his sister. He shoved his curious face right into the bush. "Whoa, she's so dirty!" Snowy shrank back in fear. Her ears flattened against her head. She was ready to bolt. She saw those small children's hands that would surely want to grab her now. But Lucy, surprisingly, didn't move. She crouched down about 6 feet from the bush and just watched. Pete, imitating his sister, also squatted. Annabelle, hearing the change in her grandchildren's voices, put down the wipe. She slowly turned, focused her eyes, and scanned the lilac bush. At first, she only saw a gray patch, but then, looking closer, she saw the eyes. Snowy, despite her fear, did not close them. She looked directly at the woman. They were enormous, piercing amber eyes that seemed to contain all the pain, grime, and hunger of the past 7 months. The gaze was not aggressive, but completely broken. But in its very depths, at the point of focus, a tiny, stubborn spark still burned, the legacy of her breed. Annabelle was a woman of experience who had seen life. She had witnessed many things, and she could recognize another's sorrow at first glance. But with this gaze, she felt something warm and heavy clench in her chest. She saw not just a dirty street cat. She saw a creature who, having been purebred and domesticated, was thrown out to die and had miraculously survived. The dirt covering her fur was thick, almost like armor, but through it, that once dazzling white color was trying to push through. Annabelle didn't say a word. She slowly, very slowly, so as not to startle her, raised her finger to her lips, commanding her grandchildren to be silent. "Her eyes are so big, like drawn on," Lucy whispered. "Shh," Annabelle replied, but not to her grandchildren. She was speaking to the cat, using a soft, almost soundless intonation. She looked into the cat's eyes, trying to convey, "I see you. I see who you were." It was the first genuine human attention in 7 months, directed not at rejection, but at recognition. Snowy didn't move. The pads of her front paws underneath her had gone numb. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about where to run. She was simply waiting. waiting for that gaze to stop being kind, but it didn't stop. Annabel slowly raised her hand without any sudden movements. She took a small piece of bread from her bag. She didn't throw it, she just placed it on the path about 10 feet from the bush. "Go on, my sweet one," Annabel said softly, gently, as if talking to her own past. Lucy and Pete sat quietly, holding their breath. Snowy looked at the bread. She wanted to rush forward, but fear held her tighter than the strongest chain. The internal instinct screamed, "It's a trap! It's a trap!" She remained motionless, but her amber eyes never left the woman or the food. The battle for food and the battle with fear had only just begun. Her own cat, Rusty, had passed away 5 years ago. He was big, orange, and lazy. But his absence was still felt in the house like a lack of warmth. Annabel remembered his gaze, proud, well-fed, and secure about tomorrow. She sat on the same bench where she had first seen the dirty lump yesterday, and that memory sat in her heart like a sharp splinter. She came again today. She came not for a walk, but to feed. This time she was prepared. In her pocket were small, finely chopped pieces of cooked turkey, lean meat, perfect for a weakened stomach. Lucy and Pete sat beside her. They understood the gravity of the moment and were unusually quiet. "Grandma, she didn't come out," Pete whispered, clutching his plastic airplane in his hand. "Wait, Pete," Annabel said, not to her grandson, but to herself. "She's scared." Her hand, holding the piece of turkey, was warm and slightly damp. The heaviness in her hands spoke of her own hesitation. Should she really be doing this? Did she have the strength? It was about 10 a.m. The sun was already warm, and the air was filled with the thick, sweet fragrance of blooming lilacs. But even this spring scent couldn't mask the smell of old, matted fur that seemed to emanate from the cat. The cat, hidden in the bushes, was there. She was awake. Her amber eyes, like two perfectly polished stones, were fixed on the woman's hand. The instinct of hunger fought with fear. She remembered how yesterday this human had brought a piece of cheese. She hadn't touched it, but at night she felt that her territory was not empty for the first time in 7 months. Annabel placed a piece of turkey on the ground. Again, she didn't throw it. She placed it, carefully, slowly, demonstrating there was no aggression. "Lucy, Pete, don't look. Go draw with chalk on the pavement," she commanded. The children, obeying her tone, stood up. Lucy, before walking away, slowly turned back and said, "She's very unhappy, Grandma." "I know, sweetie," Annabel replied quietly. And at that moment her heart broke a little. The cat saw their retreating silhouettes, but the woman's hand remained on the bench, motionless, dangerous. She slowly, inch by inch, extended her head from under the bush. The smell of meat was so strong, so alluring. It evoked memories of home, clean bowls, and peace. Snowy decided. She needed only 2 seconds. A quick dash, the food in her mouth, and back. She slipped out of the bush. Her body moved low, pressed to the ground. She felt her flanks tense with the first movement of the morning. She darted toward the meat, grabbed it, and Annabel couldn't help herself. She made an involuntary, barely noticeable movement with her fingers, as if wanting to stroke her. That was enough. The cat's reaction was instantaneous. She didn't have time to swallow the meat. Sensing the slightest movement, she sharply flinched, lowered her head, and the meat dropped from her mouth onto the grass. Fear had conquered hunger. She bolted back into the bush. Her hind legs pushed off the ground, raising dry dust. She flew into her refuge, trembling all over. She pressed herself against the lilac roots, and her heart pounded so violently it felt like she would suffocate. Annabel sat motionless. Her hand, which had made that fatal, unintentional movement, froze. She saw how the cat recoiled. She felt guilty. She slowly stood up, walked over to the dropped meat, picked it up, and placed it a little closer to the bush. Then, turning around, she walked over to her grandchildren, who were drawing a round, awkward cat on the asphalt. "I'll come every day," Annabel told Pete. Her voice was firm. "I have a new job." "What's your job, Grandma?" Pete asked, raising his chalk-smeared elbow. "My job, Pete, is to win back her trust." Annabel bent down slightly to be at the children's level. "That's the hardest thing. We need her to believe that not all hands strike, that not all people just walk by." She left the meat on the ground and led her grandchildren away. This was the third time she had left food, and the second time the cat hadn't eaten it. This morning was a defeat, but also a step forward. Snowy had come close enough to feel the human's breath on her, and although she had fled, she could still smell the turkey lying only 1.5 feet from her nose. She would come tomorrow. She had to come, because the food left there was not a lure. It was a promise. They came for 6 days straight. The cat got used to their schedule. 10 o'clock a.m., Annabel, Lucy, Pete. Food. Always lean meat or cheese, always in the same spot, about 5 feet from her bush. She only ate after they left. In those 6 days, she gained only a little weight, but more importantly, her fear became selective. She stopped fearing this particular woman and these specific children. Today was the 7th day. The sun was high. Annabel, having sent her grandchildren to play on the other side of the playground, sat on the bench. She was reading a book. She knew if she didn't look, the cat would come out. Snowy emerged. She no longer ran. She crawled, pressing her entire dirty gray body to the ground. Her front paws stretched forward as if she were measuring the distance. She approached the piece of turkey lying by the roots of the old maple tree. The scent carried her back to the memory of a distant, safe home. She quickly swallowed the meat, and then something unexpected, sudden, happened. From the far side of the yard, from the street, a loud, furious bark rang out. It wasn't a street yelp, but a low, chest-deep growl. A large, short-haired dog appeared in the gap between the buildings, a Staffordshire Terrier off-leash, wearing a collar but without an owner. It had apparently escaped. The dog's eyes burned with predatory, eager fire. It sniffed the air in the yard. The cat froze. Her head abruptly pulled back into her shoulders, and her entire body instantly went rigid. Pure animal terror paralyzed her. This wasn't a fight with the orange tomcat. This was death. The dog saw her. A dirty, motionless lump under the maple tree. A target. It lunged forward, its heavy, muscular paws thumped on the asphalt. Annabel sprang from the bench. Time seemed to stop. She didn't think about fear. She saw her Lucy and Pete, who had just been laughing, now frozen in horror 30 feet from the scene. And she saw the cat. Her tucked paws weren't moving. She wasn't running. She had surrendered. Annabel acted instantly. She ran toward the dog, intercepting it mid-dash. "Hey! No! Get out!" she screamed. Her voice wasn't screeching, but low and hard as steel. She thrust her bag forward like a shield. The dog, stunned by the sudden loud barrier, braked sharply, the rush of air startling Annabel. The dog bared its teeth, but its attention shifted. "Pete! Lucy! Run to the building! Quick!" Annabel yelled, not taking her eyes off the dog. The children finally broke out of their paralysis and bolted toward the nearest door. Snowy, who had survived the scene on instinct, now lay flattened under the maple. A spasm ran through her body. In the dog's eyes, she had seen what she saw in Natalie's eyes when she was abandoned, a pure, casual indifference to her life. Annabel, ensuring the children were safe, shouted at the dog again, using loud, sharp sounds that made it back away. "Get away! Go on! Get out of here!" The dog, confused and failing to find easy prey, finally turned around and trotted off in the other direction, growling discontentedly. Silence returned. Annabel slowly lowered her bag and then, exhausted, sank onto the bench. Her breathing was ragged and fast. She looked at the cat. The cat lay as if glued to the ground. Annabel didn't get up. She slowly, very slowly, reached out her hand to her. Her hand wasn't moving to offer food. It was moving to offer comfort. "There, there," the woman whispered. "It's over, my sweet one. It's over." The hand descended, making contact. It was the first human touch in 7 months. It was gentle but firm, without pity. The hand rested on the dirty, coarse fur just below the scruff. Snowy felt the weight. For 7 months, instinct had screamed, "Run!" But now, after the terror she'd endured, instinct suddenly fell silent. The hand didn't strike. The hand carried warmth. Instead of running away, the cat did something incredible. She slowly turned her head, pressed her dirty, pointed chin into the woman's warm palm, and her soft underbelly, which had always been protected, slightly relaxed. Annabel felt the hard, matted grime beneath her fingers. She didn't pull her hand away. She began to stroke the cat very, very slowly. In that moment, she knew she couldn't leave her here. "You're mine now. You're mine," Annabel said. The cat didn't respond, but she didn't run away. Trust had been won not with food, but with shared fear and protection. Tomorrow, when she came back, she would take her home. The morning was sunny, but for Snowy, it began with a new, sharp wave of fear. Annabel, who arrived with her grandchildren, didn't try to catch her. She simply brought a small, clean, herb-scented carrier and placed it nearby. "Come on, Snowy, it's time," the woman said. The cat didn't move. She could have run, but her muscles seemed to have given up after yesterday. Instead of bolting, she felt only emptiness inside. Snowy slowly, almost swaying, walked into the carrier. It was a voluntary surrender. The ride to the veterinary clinic was hell. Smells, the sharp smells of asphalt, rubber, and the anxious lives of others. She sat motionless, the pads of her paws dug into the plastic bottom. The clinic was filled with the deafening smell of antiseptic, mixed with the odors of other creatures' fears. Annabel held the carrier tightly. Lucy and Pete waited in the hallway. Their faces were pale and tense. The veterinarian, a young, tall man, carefully examined the cat. "Well, what do we have here?" he asked, neatly pulling on gloves. "A real street-fighting machine." "No, Doctor," Annabel shook her head. "She's not a fighter. I think she was a house cat." "She was," the vet confirmed, gently feeling the dirty lump. "The girl is severely emaciated. She's about 5 years old, judging by her teeth. And this," he ran his hand over her chest, "this isn't just dirt. This is the result of life on the street." Then he took her front paw, carefully examining the claw capsules. Surprisingly, her claws are clean, as if she never sharpened them on wood or concrete. And here, he pointed to her abdomen, a scar. Neat, healed. He looked at Annabel. "She's spayed. She was operated on a long time ago when she was a kitten. This looks very much like a breeder's operation, or at least one done at a good clinic. She's a purebred, Annabel. Look at her face, the shape of her skull. I'm almost certain she's a chinchilla Persian or something similar. Just look at the beauty this dirt is hiding. Snowy heard the word spade. It meant nothing to her in terms of understanding, but it was connected to the pain and emptiness she felt. The vet ordered blood tests, administered vaccinations, and applied salve to her old wounds. He said that overall the cat was healthy but completely exhausted, terrified, and needed to be thoroughly washed to understand what lay beneath the grime. The first thing Snowy felt in the new apartment was the smell. The scent of clean floors, old furniture, and the lingering odor of Rusty, the previous cat, which still hung in the air. It was foreign, but not hostile. Annabel took the cat straight to the bathroom. It was warm and steamy in here. Snowy saw a huge white porcelain bowl filled with warm water. Snowy fought. Bathing. This was the final humiliation. She felt like they were trying to wash her off the face of the earth. She twisted. Her hocks pushed off the edge of the tub as she tried to escape, but Annabel's hands were strong. The woman spoke to her quietly, monotonously, as if lulling her to sleep. "It's okay, my dear. I know you're a house cat. You just forgot." The first batch of water mixed with shampoo immediately turned murky, thick, almost black. This was the dirt of Willow Street, Central Avenue, Hope Lane, her entire 7-month history draining away. Snowy felt her body relax for the first time in a very long time. The softness began to emerge from beneath the tough gray crust. The woman didn't give up. She worked her fingers, forcefully penetrating deep into the fur. With each fresh rinse of water, the color changed, from dirty gray to light gray to sandy, and finally to dazzling white. When the procedure was over, the cat was wrapped in a soft, clean towel. She looked stunned, but no longer terrified. From beneath the dirty mask, the real Snowy was looking out. She had long, thick, snow-white fur, with a faint, barely noticeable silver sheen, exactly as the vet had described. A pure-bred beauty. Her eyes, freed from soot and exhaustion, shone with bright, clean amber. Annabel, brushing her, couldn't hold back. A tear rolled down her cheek. Snowy lay wrapped in the towel. Her body was clean. She was once again filled with the scent of cleanliness and warmth, but most importantly, her old dirty life was left behind in the bathtub. The Snow White of Hope Lane had been returned to life. After the bath, the world changed. The cat, who had been Snowy on the street, lay on a clean terry towel next to the radiator in the hallway. The warmth was not just pleasant, it was life-giving. The trembling that had constantly racked her body on the street was gone, and only a deep, exhausting weakness remained. She felt as though a heavy, dirty shell had been removed from her. She licked her front paw, her jaw aching from the unfamiliar feeling of clean, soft fur. This new, clean scent of her own body was foreign to her, but it was safe. Lucy and Pete sat about 30 feet away in the kitchen doorway, their eyes fixed on her. They were whispering quietly, and strangely, it wasn't frightening. There was no aggression in their voices. "Grandma, she's so beautiful," Lucy whispered. "Doesn't she look like Snow White?" "It's too long, Lucy Bug," Annabel replied, entering the hallway. She brought fresh water in a heavy ceramic bowl and placed a bowl of warm pâté next to it. Annabel crouched down at a safe distance. "Eat, my sweet one. You're going to have a new name," she told the cat, as if she could understand. Annabel examined her carefully. White fur, clear amber eyes, a neat though emaciated face. She knew the name had to be simple and clean, like her new appearance. Pete, emboldened, darted forward. "Let's call her Cloudy because she looks like a cloud." "No, Snowflake," Lucy objected. "No, Snow White." Annabel chuckled softly. "Snow White won't do. She's had enough fairy tales on the street. She needs something simple. Look how white she is." The cat, while they argued, slowly, hesitantly, approached the bowl. Pâté. It smelled of tender meat and milk. This was food her body accepted without a fight. She began to eat, her eyes never leaving the woman. Her ears were turned back. She listened to every word but showed no fear. "Blanca," Annabel said, short and clear. It suits her, white as a snowflake in the fresh snow. Lucy and Pete immediately picked it up. "Blanca, Blanca," Pete whispered. "You'll be Blanca." The cat, who was once Snowy, was now Blanca. For her, it was more than just a word. It was a symbol of renouncing the past. Snowy was a darling in a showcase home. Blanca was a survivor who had been given a second chance. She ate all the food, not leaving a single crumb. Then, turning with difficulty, she went back to the towel by the radiator. Her eyes were heavy. Finally, she closed them. It was the first truly deep sleep in 7 months. Annabel stood up, feeling a pleasant warmth in her chest. "There you go, Blanca," she said. "You're home." She left the cat in peace. A long road lay ahead, restoring her weight, her trust, and her instincts as a domestic animal. But most importantly, the purebred cat who had survived the horrors of the street was no longer anyone's burden. She was Blanca, her own property and her own responsibility.